If you have never worked with formal curriculum before, then it can be really overwhelming to open that box and see all these different pieces and have no idea what you're supposed to do with it or where you're supposed to start. So in today's video, I'm going to explain to you all of the common resources that typically come in a curriculum program and how to use them so that you know exactly what to do. We can usually divide all these different resources that come in a curriculum program into two different categories. The first would be instructor materials, and the second would be student materials. So let's start with the stuff that you are going to be using, all of the instructor materials. The first thing that you're probably going to want to identify is the instructor's guide, the teacher's manual, whatever it's called, the main thing for the teacher. Sometimes that is a big binder. Sometimes it's a book. Sometimes it looks like a script. It just depends on how that particular publisher has structured their instructor materials. Now, that instructor's guide might have a whole variety of things in it. You might find an answer key. You might find an overview of the curriculum. You might find an actual script that you will read through with your students. You might find something like a scope and sequence, which we'll talk about in a minute, or maybe even a schedule that they recommend using. Whenever you get that teacher's guide, the first thing you're going to want to do is look through it and see what kind of materials they're giving you. What kind of instruction for you are they providing? There are going to be lots of things in there, and you're going to want to be familiar with what all is there and how it's laid out so that when you go to use it every day, you know where to find everything that you need. Now, sometimes all those things that I just mentioned that might be in there might also be separated out into their own individual pieces. So that means that you might find a separate answer key that's going to give you all of the answers for all of the student activities and student materials that we'll talk about in a minute. Definitely do not lose that. Another piece that you might find is the scope and sequence. The scope and sequence is going to tell you all of the different concepts that that curriculum is going to cover and the order or the sequence in which it's going to cover them. This can be really handy if you've already done this subject before. Let's say it's history and it's a very big history program and you've already done some pieces with other curriculums, then you can look and say, okay, well, we've already done this, already done this, already done this. So we're not even going to have to worry about those things. And then you can kind of see, okay, what does that leave us with? Now, there might also be attached to that something called the actual schedule. The schedule is going to be laid out to show you what the publisher thinks that you should do every week. Now, here's the thing about the schedule. This is the first thing that I tell everybody to pitch. The schedule is not nearly as important as the scope and sequence because the scope and sequence allows you to decide, okay, of all of the stuff that we have here, what do I really want to focus on? What does my child really need to know? Quite often, that schedule can be really intimidating because they're going to put everything in it. There's going to be something probably every day or at least every week for every piece of the curriculum that you've received. But here's the thing, you may choose not to use every piece of the curriculum, and that's okay. So when you look at that schedule, the first thought can be, my gosh, it's going to take us like an hour to get through all this stuff. See the schedule as like a buffet that you get to choose from. This week, they're recommending that we do this reading and this activity and this workbook page and this quiz, okay? We're only going to do this reading and this activity. We don't need to do the rest, okay? You get to choose what pieces you actually want to do. Never, ever, ever feel like you are beholden to that schedule. The number of days that you have in your homeschool year might be different from what they've scheduled. You may want to take more time. You may want to take less time. And you never want to move on before your kids are ready to move on. And the publisher has no idea how long that's going to take, right? So if they have only allotted for 3 days on a particular concept, that doesn't mean your children are actually going to get it in 3 days. It might take them 5 days. It might take them 1 day. So the schedule, not very important. And I personally say, get rid of it. Now, the next thing you're going to want to identify is the actual instruction. How is this program going to teach your children? Does it come with DVDs? Is there an online website that you're going to go to stream the videos? Are you going to be the one teaching? Maybe the instructor's guide has a script for you to read, or maybe they are just going to tell you, okay, read this textbook with your child, this page to this page, and then have them go do these activities. So you need to figure out, what materials do I personally need in order to actually teach? Or do I need any materials? If the DVD is going to do it for you, then you don't have to worry about it, right? So make sure that you find the actual instruction and figure out, where's the instruction coming from. Now, the next category of resources would be the student resources. Of all the stuff that's in the box, what is your child going to need? Now, typically there's going to be a textbook, and depending obviously on the age of your child, that might be something they use, or it might be something you use. Or it might be something that you kind of go back and forth. Hey, I'll read you today's lesson, but tomorrow I'm going to have you read this, right? Just kind of depends on the age of your kids, what the subject is, how you're choosing to approach that subject as a family. There may also be some kind of a workbook, and that's typically where the student is going to do most of their work themselves. So for example, there might be comprehension questions. There might be maps that they need to add things to, or they need to find information on. Obviously, if it's a math program, then the workbook is going to have the actual problems that they're working. And sometimes you'll find that there's something called a work text, which is actually a combination of a textbook and a workbook. Think of what you would typically see in a textbook. You'd see charts, you'd see the actual text, right? And then think of what you'd see in a workbook. You'd see the activities, the things that the student is actually writing. In a work text, those two things are together. So there would be instruction through the graphs and the charts and the maps and the text, whatever, right? But then there would also be places for them to actually do their work, the questions or the little puzzles, or equations for them to work out, whatever it is, depending on the subject. So you might find that both of those resources have actually been combined into one thing. Now, there might also be an activity pack. Sometimes this is something that's geared towards the student, and actually sometimes it's geared towards the parent. It just kind of depends on the program. But the activity pack is going to have extra activities. It's not the workbook. It's not going to be the direct response of the student to the instruction. It's going to be activities that are going to further drive home the instruction. So for example, in a history or a science curriculum, this might be something that has them constructing some kind of a model, or maybe it's recipes from back in the day, or maybe it's instructions for a project that they're going to do. The activity book may have a whole wide variety of things, and it might be something that you choose to give to your child and say, hey, I want you to choose 2 or 3 things out of here to do this month. Or it might be something that you keep with your materials and you look through every week and kind of identify, yes, I think we're going to do this. No, I don't think we'll do this. Just depending again on what your child is interested in and what your goals are for them as they go through this curriculum. Now, also depending on what the subject is, you might find what we call manipulatives. These are physical objects that help to teach the concepts. And this is very common, particularly with math. Math programs a lot of times will come with maybe a scale, maybe it comes with counters, maybe it comes with base 10 blocks. There could be all sorts of things that your child is able to use to help them physically create the math problems that they're working through so that they can visually see what's going on. Now, this might also be something that you get with a science program, and it might be part of the labs. That would be another thing, depending again on the subject, that's kind of specific to science. You may find that you have lab materials. There might also be lab reports, a lab book, separate lab instruction. So again, depending on what the subject is, if there are some specialty things like labs, then you're going to have a whole other set of materials that you're going to need to sort through and decide, how are we going to use these? Are we going to use these at all? Now, as you're listening to all these various things, if you have not actually purchased a curriculum yet, and you have not yet had the experience of opening a box and seeing all of these pieces, you might be starting to think, okay, even if we just do the 4 basic subjects, reading, or I should say language arts, math, history, and science, all 4 of those subjects multiplied by a box with all this stuff means that I am going to be drowning in resources. There's going to be stuff everywhere. And Yes, it is true that when you start homeschooling, you quite often accumulate a lot of stuff, a lot of materials and resources that come with these programs. But I want to reassure you, if you're starting to panic right now and thinking, my gosh, it's going to take me an hour every day just to sort through all the stuff, I want you to realize, first of all, that like I said earlier, you do not have to use every single thing that comes in your curriculum. You might choose on a weekly basis what you're actually going to use. You may, from the very beginning of the year, pitch certain things and say, you know what, we are never going to do this. Okay. Putting this stuff aside, I'm going to sell it right now to another homeschooler who will use it because I know there ain't no way. We're just not going to do it. You might also decide, you know what? We are going to go through this once a quarter and we're just going to pick out a couple of things. Okay. Remember that curriculum is just a tool. It is a tool that you get to wield however you want to. You have the option to go through every curriculum that you purchase and weed through it to pick out the pieces you really want and get rid of the ones that you don't so that you do not feel overwhelmed. Never feel obligated to use everything in there and never feel obligated to use it the way that the publisher recommends that you use it. Here's the thing about curriculum. It's not magic, okay? You are not going to wreck it by using it a different way. You get to decide what makes sense for your family and you get to use it accordingly. So when you get that first box, first thing I recommend, get rid of the schedule. You don't need it. Just go through it at your own pace, okay? Next thing, go through things like the activity pack, any like extras that happen to come. Maybe it comes with flashcards. Maybe, if it's a Bible curriculum, maybe it comes with like memory verses or reading plans, and decide, okay, all these extras, do I really need these? Are these absolutely imperative? Or do I want to put them away for a little while and maybe over time we can start using them? Because whatever you start to do at the beginning of the year does not have to be the way that you do it for the whole year. You can choose to kind of roll your curriculum in. Let's start just by doing the textbook and the workbook. And then after a couple weeks, maybe we'll add in an activity. And then maybe after Christmas, we'll start adding in labs. Okay. Nobody says you have to do everything straight out of the gate. So that's the first thing I want you to remember is that curriculum is just a tool and you get to use it however you want to. Now, another way that you can help yourself to not be overwhelmed with all that curriculum is by not using curriculum for every single subject. You don't have to. Curriculum is not a requirement of homeschooling. There are some subjects that are much easier to teach with curriculum, but you are never required to use curriculum to homeschool. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, can I just like go to the library and get some resources? Yeah, you can. That is totally acceptable. You absolutely can do that. And you might find that when you first start, you want to start really slow with maybe just curriculum for language arts and math, or maybe even just math. Everything else, we'll just figure it out as we go. And as you ramp up your homeschool, you might find, okay, you know what, we're ready to add in some more materials here. We're ready to go with a more formal curriculum here. But it is not a requirement to start that way. And that's actually one of the tenets of my simplified approach to homeschooling. My simplified homeschooling framework explains more about how you can homeschool with minimal curriculum, but still maximum impact. So take a look at the end of this video. There will be a link to that if you want to check that out and see what that looks like, because it's true that it can get very overwhelming and it can make homeschool take longer than it needs to sometimes when we're using curriculum for everything. Well, keep watching this series to learn more about curriculum and how to use it in your homeschool so that it does not overwhelm you. I hope this video has been helpful. Please like and subscribe if you found it to be useful, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.